Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Okay, before I start, I just like to wish all of you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I hope that you will spend the rest of your year, in health and happiness, and that your next year will be better than this one. Okay, today I'm not going to be using a lot of PowerPoint slides because I've been really busy, and honestly, I don't think you guys will mind, right? If I just, I don't use slides for this video lecture. Yeah, I guess, of course, it would appeal very well to the visual learners, but I'm sorry, those of you who are visual learners, I'll tell you the truth. I couldn't be stuffed to do any slides for this video because it's actually, I'm actually making a point by not putting in any slides. Yeah, I'll tell you the point of the of not using any slides by the end of this video. And okay, so let's get started. Okay, today's video lecture is called Quantifying Intelligence is a Fool's Errand, and why standardized testing is a horrible measure of intelligence. Okay, in the 1930s, Professor William Sheldon of Harvard University came up with the somatotype theory, which categorizes people into three distinct body types: the mesomorph, the naturally lean and muscular; the endomorph, the naturally fat; and the ectomorph, the naturally skinny. Now, according to Professor Sheldon, your body type was pretty much set in stone, and you could apparently tell a mesomorph, an endomorph, or an ectomorph just by looking at them. Was he right? Well, yes and no. That Professor Sheldon was correct in the sense that genetics do indeed play a role in your natural potential to burn fat and build muscle. Now, I know there are a couple of guys like Scooby who insist that, well, somatotypes don't exist. It's all a matter of hard work and good judicious food choices. That's his opinion, and he's entitled to it. But to a certain extent, actually, they do exist. Now, if you were, hypothetically speaking, however, a person who was naturally inclined to put on weight, following a sensible diet, avoiding alcohol, and performing regular exercise would probably keep your BMI in check. If you were a naturally wiry man, on the other hand, performing weight training at a gym, heavy weights, mind you, and following a high-calorie diet would indeed help you to put on a bit of bulk. Also, it is too simplistic to categorize people in just three basic categories. Most of us are a combination of two of them. Now, for instance, I'm an endomesomorph in the sense that I put on fat pretty easily, but I lose it pretty easily as well, and I form a V-taper quite easily. My weight fluctuates depending on how judicious I am with my diet. I have my fat months, and I also have my lean months. So we can see that Sheldon was half correct. People were biologically wired in different ways, but he was mistaken to assume that you could tell a person's body type just by looking at him or her, right? So IQ, or intellectual quotient, is something like somatotypes. It's an interesting theory, and it, there are many grains of truth in it, but it's also a highly questionable field that has a very sketchy history. It's also courted its fair share of criticism. Now, throughout the early 20th century, some dudes in lab coats decided that there was some objective scientific manner by which you could somehow quantify intelligence. So they created a series of standardized tests that encompass questions which mainly involve pattern spotting and mathematical deductions. Now, the only problem with these tests, they are highly skewed in favor of the left brain, the logical, analytical side of the brain, and do not, in my opinion, measure wit, eloquence, street smarts, or creativity. which can also be argued to be forms of intelligence, although very old school stick of the mud pedagogists would disagree. If you're good at mathematics, for instance, you will probably do very well on an IQ test. Now, if you habitually play lots of puzzle games and have been exposed to a multitude of patterns, you'll probably also be very good at IQ tests. Now, on the other hand, if you aren't good at mathematics and take no interest in puzzle games, you might do poorly on them. You might do well, you might do poorly, but it's likely that you won't do as well as somebody who is good at math and is fond of playing puzzle games, you know, like Sudoku, crosswords, and all that. Also, it is doubtful if a white-collar professional sitting in an air-conditioned office who can ace IQ tests would be able to survive for a week in the African wilderness if expected to live the life of a Maasai tribesman, and given all the necessary tools to do so. Furthermore, we cannot say for certain if some of the finest purveyors of literature, such as William Shakespeare, Lord Byron, or Lady Murasaki Shikibu, you know, the Japanese lady who lived in the Heian era about 800 years ago, who wrote the first full-length novel in the world, Genji no Monogatari, The Tale of Genji. We don't know if these outstanding literary geniuses would actually do well on an IQ test. If you take 10 different IQ tests, you will probably not get the same score all those 10 times as well. You see, there are so many variables that play into how well you do in an IQ test beyond basic biology, such as your schema, the sum, which means the sum total of your values and beliefs, your educational level, as well as your mood on that particular day. Now, if all other factors being equal, you're naturally in a good mood with little agitation and stress, you will have a psychological edge and probably naturally do better than someone in a tense mood. Now, at best, IQ tests are a very limited means by which we can quantify intelligence. But at worst, they have a much more insidious role to play. Now, why do you think nerdy Nazis like Stefan Molyneux or Charles Murray love IQ tests, you know? As a matter of fact, fascists and eugenicists have loved IQ tests for as long as they have existed. And they argue that IQ tests are an unbiased and objective way to prove the inherent superiority and inherent inferiority of certain groups of people, and the inherent right for certain people to oppress and the inherent right for certain people to be oppressed. Now, as I mentioned, IQ tests are inherently skewed towards a certain type of brain and do not possess the capacity to measure a wide variety of intelligences. Furthermore, although race realists, as they so euphemistically term themselves, the nerdy Nazis so euphemistically term themselves race realists, these people vehemently insist that IQ is inherent and unchangeable. It has been shown that that is far, far, far to the contrary, you know, like the idea that if you cannot change your IQ is simply not true, you know. Yeah, environmental factors can and do play a role in changing them. You can certainly get better at them through practice, just as you can certainly get better at mathematics through practice. Yeah, so, you know, I suspect that at the bottom of their hearts, the American Nazis know this to be true. And that is why they took great pains in the Jim Crow era to ensure that black stupidity, quote unquote, black stupidity would become a self-fulfilling prophecy by barring African Americans from attending school or using public libraries until recent decades. So you might wonder why it is that Asian Americans do even better at IQ tests than Caucasian Americans. Well, that in itself is also a self-fulfilling prophecy. You see, I've mentioned time and again that Asians were used as a wrench by the white supremacists in the civil rights movement of the 1960s in order to undermine their movement. Now, the American Nazis would be more congenial to the yellow man. He would allow the yellow man's children to attend white schools and prop him up as the so-called model minority, aka honorary Aryan, to prove that America really wasn't a racist place and that blacks were only in their position because of their inherent mental deficiencies. So due to immense pressure to fit this artificial stereotype, because there's no such thing as model minority Asia in Asia, it's an artificial stereotype created by America, to keep their model minority card and not be picked on by the nice white supremacists, Asian Americans went all out to do well at school, and that meant hours and hours of studying and mathematics practice. Now, what do you think the natural result of that is? Of course, higher average IQ scores for the Asian community. But where do Blasians, half black, half Asian people fit into all this race realism though? Are they black or are they Asian? See, that's what makes race realism, or the belief that certain races are inherently smarter or dumber, such a ludicrous proposition. I mean, it's not only offensive, it's pretty ludicrous, because how do you determine what race people are if they are mixed? If somebody is Blasian, how do you determine whether they're black or Asian? It's preposterous. Now, it's also possible for scientific races, to, like Stefan Molyneux, for example, to weaponize IQ tests by regulating the variables, like giving certain races or cultures a leg up by skewing the questions in favor of them and selectively picking sample sizes of the participants to, to fit their narrative. Now, like they could get a couple of really dumb blacks. They could, not dumb, sorry, they could pick some really dumb people of this race. I'm not saying if you don't get 100 for an IQ test, I'm not saying you're dumb, but they might deliberately pick some people from a certain race that they feel are less intelligent, and they may pick the academic cream of the crop from another race to get their point to take these tests. You see what I mean? In fact, even today, many Caucasians who praise Asian Americans as being smart do not actually consider us or our cultures to be equal to whites in their cultures. Oscar Wilde was spot on when he said, "Give a man a mask and he will tell you the truth." Now, if you go on an online forum where anonymity protects, excuse me, hiccups, anonymity protects people's identities, it's still commonplace to see people, saying things like, China and India should thank the British Empire for bringing civilization to them. Or, I wish we still had our colonies. They would do so much better under Western rule. So, you see, during colonial times, in fact, when we weren't needed to serve as the wrench in the civil rights movement, white supremacists didn't actually consider Asians to be very smart. Some liberal governors of Hong Kong actually proposed the idea of democracy, but the British government considered East Asians to be too mentally deficient for that to work out. You ever heard of The White Man's Burden by Rudyard Kipling? It's basically a poem of how the white race, which is naturally more intelligent and more civilized, has a duty, a divine duty, to go around the world enlightening the stupid, benighted black, brown, and yellow people. They certainly weren't calling us Asians smart back then, were they? When it wasn't convenient for them to do so. Here's a hard truth that many Asian Americans who proudly consider themselves to be the model minority and believe they have overcome racism find very difficult to swallow. The fellows on Fox News and PragerU may praise you for being quote unquote smart because you've managed to ace their IQ tests, but they don't actually like us more than they do other minorities. They may find us useful in their crusade to prove their social Darwinian theories of superior and inferior races, the inconvenient minority, if you will. But in their heart of hearts, they are revolted by our culture, our so-called collectivist culture, as Professor Jordan Peterson so distastefully put it. I mean, he put it in such a disgusted manner. They get a few glasses of whiskey into Jordan Peterson, ask him what he really thinks about Asian culture, since people like him keep calling us the model minority. Now ask him if he thinks it is just as good as Western culture, different but equal. And if you were expecting him to be heaping our culture with as much as he praises Asian American intelligence, you'll probably be very bitterly disappointed. But I've digressed for far too long, and we'll get back to the point. You see, you can't tangibly measure something that is as abstract as human intelligence. An observation I've made about the typical Anglo-Western mind, and look, I'm not saying this to put you down here. It's just an observation, and you can disagree with me, but is that it has this obsession with quantifying everything, putting everything into black and white categories, pardon the pun. Now, it's not entirely a bad thing in itself. I mean, the Anglo-Western mind is excellent at logical and analytical deduction, and it was this that propelled the scientific drive for the Industrial Revolution, which gave rise to the modern world. Although I must add that this newfound prosperity of the West was possible largely due to exploitation of misery abroad. Now, I must also stress that time and again, when I say Anglo-Western mind, it's not a race thing, but rather a cultural thing. Now, even an Asian like Azli Rahman, or an African like Thomas Sowell, or a Middle Easterner like Steve Jobs can possess an Anglo-Western mind if it has transfixed itself into his or her body. You know, it's not something that's entirely bad, but I'm just trying to explain why sometimes the Anglo-Western mind, in its pathological obsession with categorizing everything, quantifying everything, sometimes falls short. Sometimes doesn't, the typical Anglo-Western mind is so obsessed with putting everything into neat little boxes and categorizing things as objectively good or objectively bad. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong. There are certain things that are universally objectively bad that every decent human being who isn't a psychopath would agree are objectively bad, such as rape or molesting children. But because the Anglo-Western mind is so obsessed with putting things into neat little categories, it sometimes mistakes cultural differences as cultural shortcomings, because those cultural differences, like the multi-generational family unit, the collective culture of Asia, as opposed to the individualistic culture, do not fit within the neat parameters of their worldview. And that, to me, is one of the shortcomings of the typical modern Anglo-Western worldview. This pathological obsession with putting everything on a lobster hierarchy. And even if you aren't a fascist, with an axe to grind against certain racial groups, this belief that you can accurately quantify a person's objective intelligence is a rather presumptuous one, in my view. It's largely a Western belief, yeah? Now, who are you, a mere flesh and blood mortal, to think that you can measure something that we can't even accurately define? Intelligence is an abstract noun, not a concrete one. you can objectively measure the height of a building or the width of a coffee table because buildings and coffee tables are concrete entities. But as I said, because the Anglo-Western mind is so obsessed with measuring and quantifying every single thing, it also believes very confidently that it can accurately measure a person's definite intelligence. Now, the thing is, philosophers have spent centuries just trying to uncover the definition of intelligence. And I can tell you that most philosophers don't even agree upon the definition of intelligence without the audacity to actually claim that they have a firm definition of what it really is. If you're going to be measuring a person's objective intelligence, you might as well try to accurately determine what God's face looks like. So yes, while the Anglo-Western mind has given birth to a range of scientific advances, one of its major drawbacks is its obsession with measuring and quantifying every single thing, and its profound differences, profound difficulty it faces when it tries to negotiate differences without hierarchy. And that's also led to some pretty ugly philosophies such as social Darwinism and race realism. So in conclusion, IQ tests do have their merits in determining whether one would be good at professions which involve, deductive reasoning such as mathematics or engineering, usually the left brain professions, but they cannot reliably be used as an end-or approach in measuring objective human intelligence, since intelligence is such a broad and ill-defined spectrum that encompasses more than just, pattern spotting and puzzle solving, Now, I would urge you also to be suspicious of anyone who tells you that intelligence is genetic destiny. There's nothing that can be done about it. Even it's been shown, I believe, that when African Americans are given a better school system, and they actually, the IQ test, their IQ scores actually go up when they are in better environments. So now, hopefully, the idea in future, I'm not saying that IQ tests need to be scrapped, but in future, the idea that standardized testing as a measure of objective intelligence will join the ranks of outdated pseudoscience. They can still be used, to determine whether one will be able to be a good mathematician or a good engineer. But when it comes to as an authority on intelligence, that's very, very questionable. So that's going to the realm of pseudoscience. Just like, somatotypes are not all wrong. There are grains of truth in somatotypes, but you can't hang on to every one of Sheldon's words, because there are margins for error in Sheldon's work, So just like concepts of skull shapes in determining intelligence, that's been proven false. That's basically pseudoscience that the race realists of the past used to do. Remember the part in Django Unchained when Stephen Candy, when Candy the slave owner is like, look at the shape of this African skull. See how dumb they are, less intelligent because I can tell because of the shape of the skull. That's basically the same what people actually used to believe in the past. And the thing is, I think this idea that you can somehow quantify objective intelligence with IQ tests will also join the ranks of skull shapes, the pseudoscientific ranks. Were we to use standardized academic tests for determining which students have potential and should be allotted the best teachers, and which students are a lost cause? Now imagine all the great minds that would be wasted because they were not nurtured because we failed to see the potential in them. That is why I do not accept that if you have an IQ of below 100, that you are inherently less intelligent than someone who has an IQ of 110 or 120. I'll be just as happy to teach you as I would someone with a higher set of IQ points, as long as you're humble and willing to learn. I don't think that your chance for academic success is any less. I mean, I don't think that your potential is any less than someone who is simply better at puzzle solving, pattern or noticing patterns. Now, you may not be smart in the same way as someone with higher IQ points at you, but that doesn't mean you're less smart. You could be differently smart. Now, perhaps you would make for a lousy mathematician, but that doesn't mean you can't be a great writer or orator. Now, Napoleon was the bottom of his class in school. Just remember that. I'm not saying this to try and spare your feelings, though. I'm saying this because I sincerely believe that a lot of great minds have been left unnurtured in contemporary society due to its obsession with standardized testing, The thing is that, and that's a great shame if you ask me, because many schools actually have this attitude of giving the best teachers to the students who score the highest marks in standardized tests, the grade A students, and pretty much the worst teachers, the grade C or grade D students, the D class students, treating them like a lost cause while putting the best teachers in the classes that appear to be the most promising because they happen to score best at standardized tests. And that to me is a mistake, because, well, the thing is, you should be giving the best teachers to the students who actually need more help, because chances are, as I said, they're not dumb, they're not less intelligent than the grade A students, they're just differently intelligent. Okay, you remember why I didn't put any slides in this video? Yeah. Do you realize that in all my previous videos, I put a lot of slides? Do you think it was due to laziness that I just didn't put any other slides in this video? Not really. I'm just trying to show you that different people learn differently. An auditory learner, after having watched this video, would have no problem absorbing everything that I have said, right? But if you were a visual learner, you might have tuned off, or you might have, you wouldn't have been able to absorb quite as much as I had said. I said in this video, if you were a visual learner primarily, and you would have learned a lot better if I put in visuals, right? So this is the thing. There is no one size fits all learning style. Every self-respecting psychologist understands that there's no learning style that, one size fits all learning style. Now in the olden days, in early pedagogy, the idea was that, all kids learn the same way. A teacher would stand in front of the classroom, write stuff on the blackboard, get everyone to memorize, and pretty much do the rote learning sort of style. And that works with many students. That works with a lot of people, but it did not serve many people well, and a lot of wasted potential. There was a lot of wasted potential in the school system. There has been lots of wasted potential because basically, I'm very sympathetic to Ken Robinson's, the late Sir Ken Robinson's view that the school system, the contemporary schooling system, is very, very, it's doing a great disservice to students who learn differently. So if you don't do well in the contemporary school system, in the past, it was just basically in the 50s and 40s and 1950s, people would just say, well, it's on you. It's just because you're lazy, you don't study, you don't pay attention, But now we're learning. Now new evidence is popping up that yes, everyone is not, you can't say that that some people are dumb and some people are smart, or some people, it's just that people are differently intelligent. That's the thing. So it doesn't mean that if you didn't do well in school, that you are dumb. In the same way, like, just because, you didn't do so well in the old stick of in the mud style of learning, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't do well under a different style of learning, right? Just like if you were a visual learner, you probably would hate this video lecture of mine, because I didn't put any visuals for you. So likewise, IQ tests, yes, they can measure a certain type of intelligence. There's no doubt about it. But to treat that as the end all of intelligence measuring, I think it's like saying that it's the same as treating, a traditional chalk and blackboard classroom as being the only way to determine whether a student is a good student or a bad student. But here's the thing, though. Every seed is capable of germinating. You just have to put it in the right soil. Thank you.